Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
So hello and welcome to a very special episode we're recording today. I'm delighted to be joined by Ksenia Svetlova, who is a non-resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council's Middle East programs and is a former member of Israeli Kesit. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start the discussion with one of the articles that you've written that it appeared that the Gaza War will be the final straw for Netanyahu's long political career. And we have seen, for instance, that Prime Minister Netanyahu actually had brought the conversation about security on the table before the elections. How did this failure to protect civilians and response effectively to the Hamas attack on October 7 will challenge the leadership and policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the longer run?
Well, first of all, we feel already, and it's been just over 3 weeks after the horrific massacre in the Israeli south in October 7th, that the tension in the country certainly mounts, and the anger of the civilians, of the ordinary Israelis that send their children now to the army to fight with the Hamas, that is emboldened, that is stronger than it used to be. For many of them, it's clear that not only due to failure to predict and to prepare for this danger that many warned about, but also because of the deep mistrust between Netanyahu and the military, something has to change. He has to go. It's really been not so long after these fateful events that will definitely change the course of the history here in the region. But already, we feel that, and it will just grow because the war just begins now. It's not over. It's just in its initial phase.
And this is what I actually want to ask the next question on basis on that. In the sense of how the conversation was about shifted actually from the Palestinian issue to a larger issue of aligning the Arab world with Israel. And it was something that Prime Minister Netanyahu take pride in, of getting the Abraham Accords on table. Looking at how the situation is right now, are we back to where we started?
Well, I don't think that we are ever, can be back to the point where we started, because history has its course, and there were many developments that happened between 2020 and now that certainly do not allow to just come back to the place where we did not have official relations with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, or Morocco, and also very advanced negotiations with Saudi Arabia. The interest of this country and the interest of Israel and the US did not change. However, I think it's very clear to all actors concerned that without addressing the Palestinian issue, every negotiation, every advancement will be threatened constantly by this unexpected explosions and massacres and popular anger. So therefore, I think that, and we also heard the statement from the UAE chair of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, His Excellency Ali Rashid Al Nuaimi, just yesterday, when he said, that the relations will not be threatened between Abu Dhabi and Jerusalem. But at the same time, I think that it's crystal clear. Nobody can allow, this kind of turmoil again. And I think that we will see many new developments that will bring back perhaps the Arab Peace Initiative and other international and local initiatives that will be addressing at promoting, the two-state solution and the resolving of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yes, ma'am. I have a couple of questions before actually I move to the strategic part of it. Wanted to ask you one last thing about the politics associated, that there has been a wide range of criticism made on Prime Minister Netanyahu right before these attacks, that he was responsible for dividing the country on the basis that it has not been seen before, with people on the Knesset who was brought, which were far right, and the judicial reforms which were tabled, it divided the Israelis, and that was actually utilized by the Hamas to launch an attack in a period where the society was much divided. Is that one of the reasons as well that a lot of threats, even though was being pointed out even by the defense minister initially, were not taken in consideration in seriously before the attack actually happened?
Well, we do not have any definitive way to know what would happen if the judicial reform would not be on the table at the time. Perhaps Netanyahu would continue with the same assessment of Hamas, that he believed it's a lower risk of war with Hamas than, for example, with Hezbollah in the north. And many people thought, in the same way. We know that Hamas planned this attack long before the judicial reform was put on the table, before it was initiated. So it was their plan all along. I think that the state of division in Israel and the internal fighting just it made for them their work easier in some sense. But again, I think that not only this state of weakening of our systems and the trust between the various body and so on, but I think that a large part, it's of course the misconceptions that were held and repeated by the politicians, Netanyahu, but also by chiefs of staff, head of the security services, and so on. So it's a complex combination of many reasons that brought us to this day.
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to now come back to what the situation is right now strategically. If we look at it, we have seen yesterday Yemen, Houthis actually in Yemen have declared a war on Israel. Hezbollah is on the verge of attacking, and we have seen some of Iraqi factions has also been active in this war. So, how do you perceive the axis of resistance starting its war on Israel, and where do you see it going forward from here?
Well, there are many different scenarios, and although it seems from the first days of the war that Hezbollah might attack Israel in a full-blown attack, it didn't happen so far. And the ground invasion had started. I think everybody noticed that it started already. So there is really still, I think, no way to tell in which way things will develop in the north. There is a big probability that Hezbollah will still stay on the fence, harassing Israel, shooting on Israel territory, but still, operating within some, invisible red lines in order not to be dragged into a full in-out war that can, of course, jeopardize, its own existence in Lebanon and the welfare of this country that is already severely hit by the economic crisis and political crisis as well. As for the Houthis in the north and other pro-Iranian factions that have missiles and have the ability to harm Israel or to harm its allies, also Saudis were already attacked by Houthis. Also American bases were attacked by Iranian proxies. Then again, we have to take it seriously, but at the same time, we don't have to exaggerate as well. Because attacks from the pro-Iranian Iraqi factions on Ain al-Assad base in Iraq happened relatively in a high density during the last few years. If we are looking at the Houthis from Yemen, then yes, this is a serious development. But then again, Yemen is quite far away. And Israel does have the capabilities to, also its allies have the capability to stop these rockets before they reached Israel, and this is exactly what happened. So can they intensify? I'm not a military expert. I'm an expert on the Middle East, but I can tell you that from the military sources that we hear in Israel and who speak on terms of anonymity with journalists and so on, They appreciate that, again, it's limited ability to harm Israel. It's more of stretching the muscle. Look, our proxies are everywhere. They can threaten you everywhere. And again, Israel has to be extra careful. Jews over the world have to be extra careful because Iranians had already harmed the Jews outside of Israel many times before. So definitely we are on the alert. But still, it's not a reason to panic and to feel that, well, this is the existential war that perhaps can jeopardize the existence of the state of Israel, because it is not. It is not.
And looking at how the ground operations, ma'am, that have started in Gaza, how do you see the situation in the next few days, especially the way Israel might want to go ahead with this to destroy Hamas completely? And we have seen warfare going into tunnels, in a lot of the tunnels that have Hamas been created. Yesterday, we have seen the news that over 50 terrorists have been killed in one of the tunnels that have been bombarded. So, but in the larger implications of the war, do you see it will get tough because of the tunnels that have been created by the Hamas?
Well, so I can tell you that there are unfortunately no easy solutions for such a complicated problem that existed for a very long time. We heard about Hamas tunnels as early as the 90s, so it's ongoing attempt of Hamas to create some kind of illegal channels, either for contraband of weapons or drugs and so on, illicit goods through Egypt. And then they, of course, tried to focus on military tunnels to infiltrate Israel. Again, Israel was aware of it, and it destroyed many tunnels in 2014. But we have to understand, until there is a Hamas rule in Gaza, there will be tunnels, there will be paragliders, there will be other methods that they will use in order to try and terrorize Israeli civilians and also terrorize Palestinian civilians as well. Because, one of the officials of the Hamas said recently in an interview with Egyptian TV that the tunnels are for fighters to hit them from the planes, for the Israeli planes and so on. But as for the civilians, since they're refugees, the UN is responsible for them. So Hamas takes off its responsibility from the Palestinian citizens in Gaza. And they should not be, be allowed to do this. So in all of these years, Hamas built 400 kilometers of tunnels, but it didn't build one shelter, bomb shelter, for its citizens. So of course, Israel has to do everything possible in order to safeguard and protect civilian lives. But this task is, excruciatingly difficult, because we know that, Hamas, and it's not news to anybody, because they did it also in the midst of the Intifada in the 2000s. They hid within the residential quarters, under hospitals, under schools, in schools themselves, and they really don't have any problem to sacrifice Muslims, because we saw that they killed Muslims, Arabs, Muslims, Bedouins. They killed them during this massacre in southern Israel. Just yesterday, there are 5 more names of Arab Muslims here in Israel that were murdered by Hamas. And we see from the, this camps that this terrorists had on their heads, the GoPros, there is footage when they interrogate a guy, Palestinian from East Jerusalem. And although he says, I'm from East Jerusalem, I'm from Beit Hanina, he reads for them the Quran, they still murder him. So I think that it's quite clear that Hamas doesn't care for civilian lives, doesn't care for Arab and Muslim lives. It's a terrorist organization, and it holds all of the Gazan residents as hostages. This is the case.
And this is where I wanted to ask you, ma'am, about what the government or a lot of the media channels have been claiming about how Hamas is ISIS after the October 7 attacks. But for someone like you who have studied Islamic extremism for so long, are there any similarities or difference when we compare Hamas to ISIS? In the brutality, of course, probably they have surpassed ISIS in the way, but either ideologically, if you look at it.
Well, ideologically, these movements are not very far away from each other. They have a common base. the teachings of the radical preacher Said Qutb, the radical ideologist, the spiritual father of the Muslim Brotherhood, but also ISIS, rely on him and his teachings. So we do understand, that the goal of each of these movements, and Hamas can be considered as part of Muslim Brotherhood, is to create the caliphate eventually. Also, Hizb ut-Tahrir has the same goal. This is something that we have to be crystal clear. Hamas is not after a national state for Palestinians. They have a very different goal in mind. So they know that what they do today will not allow them to promote the goal of a sovereign and independent and viable Palestinian state. It will throw them back, actually. And they really don't care about that, So I actually saw a lot of similarities with what they did. Also brutality, but also the way that they broke all of the defenses of Israel, and they were able to conquer territory. Well, this is the same what happened in Syria and Iraq. So of course, Israel should be more alerted. Israel should be operating much better. Unfortunately, it did not prepare for this, probably because it did not understand that Hamas actually was ISIS. And I can tell you another detail that is very significant. And the Egyptians were very upset and angry about this for many years. It's cooperation between ISIS and Hamas military wing in Sinai, in northern Sinai, in 2014, 15, 16, 17, more or less, these are the years when they, produced attacks together, learned from each other, and therefore you don't see a difference. There is no difference.
But overall, the Islamic State have actually criticized Hamas over the years. We have seen, for example, for being called as an apostate of Iran, right? It didn't want Hamas to get the funding from Iran, which has been getting. So ideologically, if you look at it, how Hamas operates, it is kind of very unique in the situation that even the Islamic State does not accept is as someone. For example, the Islamic State did take out a statement and they mentioned that what happened was right, but the people who conducted it might not be the best people because they have called Hamas as not the best solution to the crisis there.
For Islamic State, they tried to open their branch in Gaza, and Hamas didn't let them. But not because they were extremists, not because, they were sadists, because they wanted a full control of the territory. They didn't want any competition. They knew that ISIS is becoming stronger. It is very, very popular. It's winning hearts, unfortunately, of some misguided people. They threw them away, of course. And therefore, this, criticism on one hand, it existed, and it exists in many Salafi circles, that you, as a Muslim Sunni movement, you should not take money, you should not cooperate with the Rafidin, for those who are regarded not Muslims by them, the Shia. But at the same time, it did not, again, prevent them from cooperate with Hamas in northern Sinai, despite the Iranian support. Okay, so there are of course these nuances between the radical Islamist groups, and some of them are pan-Islamic, and other has more kind of nationalistic features. But in the end of the day, they have the same source, the same strategy, the same tactics, and the same end game. Which is the establishing of a caliphate and going back to the golden times of Islam of the 7th century.
I have a couple of last questions, and one of them I wanted to ask you is Al-Qaeda, for example. Also, if you look at the period till 2005, it had great cooperation with Hamas as well, until the point where the Mecca agreement happened between Hamas and they started cooperating with the other groups here for a political solution in Gaza. I wanted to understand for our viewers, if you could break this down of how Hamas political and military wing operate, and how it is different from the other Salafi groups that we have seen. For example, the Islamic State, when it had positions, let's say, in Iraq and Syria.
Well, first of all, just like Hezbollah in Lebanon, they have this division that is very deceptive. And in the West, unfortunately, many people buy into it. And they, for example, outlaw the military wing. but have no problem to have some kind of conversation with the political wing until, so far. Now, today, in the hierarchy, it actually seems unclear which wing has the upper hand in decisions such as going to war, negotiating the fate of hostages, and so on. The political wing, they live outside, most of them. They do not live in Gaza, and they prefer to spend their time between Turkey and Qatar, and before that it was Syria, and before that it was Jordan. But they are never in Gaza, although they had an opportunity to go there and join their people in the jihad, for which they call. And at the same time, the military wing, of course, they are even more radical. They know that, they are they will not die of natural causes. They are ready to risk that, but at the same time, they also try to, become invisible. They hide their faces and so on, like the spokesperson of the military wing, Abu Ubaidah, who became quite a symbol, for support of the Hamas and so on. Politically, and also, you don't have to keep in mind that Hamas is a social movement. So they started with social work in the Gaza Strip, and this is how they won the hearts of the people there. They helped them in the digital towers. They distributed food for Ramadan and dowry for the brides, and open kindergartens and schools, and the refugees, of course, needed all that. And this is how it started. Then they, opened already the military branch and the political branch. So you have basically three branches of this organization. So this is why it's such a complex matter, because you are looking at this, social work that they do, and you say people who work in Hamas schools, can be considered militants or not? Can they be turned into militants at some point? We don't know, because perhaps some of them. As for other groups that work in Gaza, radical Islamist groups, Salafi and non-Salafi, first of all, they are much smaller, because they do not engage in such a vast, social, attempt on the society level. Hamas does that. Islamic Jihad is a much smaller organization, also not Salafi, and there was few small Salafi movements that, they were purely political and militant, of course. And Hamas, eradicated them and did not allow them to exist. So basically, you have now the overall control of everything that is happening in Gaza. Health, it's Hamas. Social work, it's Hamas. Charity, it's Hamas. Everything is Hamas. And you have to a smaller degree the Islamic Jihad, that again is a direct proxy of Iran, that was created by Iran, but then do not attempt to rule Gaza. They do not attempt to fight for leadership. And this is a big difference, because Hamas would not tolerate ever any movement that would, draw more, popular support or try to compete with them, for the question of who will rule Gaza next.
And this is actually very interesting, because Hamas is the same organization which initially started as an organization which is trying to give aids to people. We have seen being social welfare work. But the same organization which the leaders a few days back have mentioned the tunnels are not for the safety of civilians, but for the Hamas leader. And the UN organizations must actually try to protect the civilians. Or we have seen the millions of dollars of aids being stolen actually from Gaza by the Hamas. So it just begs to this question whether Hamas was ever inclined for the welfare of the people rather than serving their own ideology actually of the Muslim Brotherhood.
The answer to your question is definitely not. Never ever Hamas had in mind the welfare and well-being of the people in Gaza, because if that's what was its intention, in 2006 when they won the elections, the parliamentary elections, and the international quartet that consisted of US, EU, Russia, and the United Nations had offered to them, this very simple solution, how you can be accepted by the international community, how you can avoid being ostracized and punished and the sanctions and so on. So the first condition was to stop violence against Israel. This is something that we also say today. If there is no violence, goods go in, Gazans can get out. 20,000 of Gazans worked until October 7th in Israel and brought bread to their families. So you're talking about many other thousands that were dependent on them and so on. The second condition was the recognition of the previously signed agreements between Israel and the PLO. So this is the Oslo Accords. This is, of course, the recognition of two states. Hamas was incapable to doing that and accepting that because it was an Islamic ideology. And the last thing that they demanded is the recognition of the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people. And again, Hamas could join the PLO perhaps if it would recognize its authority and if it would also recognize the agreements that were signed with them, between them and Israel. It declined to all of the preconditions. And then the sanctions were introduced, when situation deteriorated very quickly. And we understood from very early days of Hamas in power, they do not want to rebuild Gaza. They do not want to create jobs in Gaza. They want to turn Gaza into their military base, huge military base with almost 2.5 million citizens that are working on it, around it, across it, and so on. So Hamas is dangerous, first of all, to Palestinian people. I actually believe, despite the enormous pain that we feel now in Israel because of our dead, that Hamas, their first victims, they were, of course, the Palestinians, and the most multiple victims, as it always happens with the radical Islamist terrorist organizations. Most of the victims of ISIS were Muslims. Most of the victims of Al-Qaeda were Muslims as well. So we are looking at Hamas and what they've done to the civilians in Gaza, launching this 5 wars against Israel with no ability to, get an upper hand, to improve the situation after that, to get a better deal, a better bargain, or something like this. They brought devastation into Gaza. The world has to understand it.
Ma'am, so where do you see the end game at this point of time? A complete destruction of Hamas, is it possible? Probably the military wings could have been destroyed, but the political leadership is still based out of Qatar, and as a movement, it still might survive even after the complete invasion of Gaza. And especially, is the invasion of Gaza at this point of time a viable option, looking at how the hostages are still in captivity of Hamas?
The invasion of Gaza has already begun. You perhaps will not see, the picture of what happened in Raqqa, for example. Yes, that it was a quicker operation, and also civilians were also bombed there, and they suffered there as well. But in Israel, we often compare between what is happening now and Mosul, the Mosul battle that lasted for 9 months. And it took a lot of time to eradicate the structure of ISIS there. So the goal cannot be eradication of Hamas, because no ideological movement can be, eradicated or liquidated by military means, of course. So the military battle against Hamas is just the first stage. The second stage, and this, the victory of Israel will only be achieved if we will make progress on the second stage, the political one. Who will rule Gaza? Will the Palestinians will be able to restructure, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority itself, to bring back people who are right now were expelled from it, or they are abroad. And there are many people who unfortunately had very bad relations with the chairman Abbas. And this is the biggest question, not whether Israel can blow all of the tunnels. I believe that it can. But what will happen in Gaza next? Because if nobody will take responsibility for Gaza and build a moderate regime that is looking to live next to Israel and not instead of Israel, then unfortunately we will be back to square one.
So last thing before I let you go, ma'am, I want to understand the view of the Israeli left when it comes to the war. And in longer terms, the two-state solution, is it still a viable option, looking at how, for example, we have seen amount of actually hatred or kind of the radicalism in the West Bank and in Gaza? But if we give them the entire state, is it in Israel's safety to give them an entire state right now, or is two-state still a viable option after what we've seen on October 7th?
Well, actually, I will be able to answer this question after the end of the war, because we do not know yet how it will develop, when it will end, and what will happen with our neighbors here in the region, specifically with the Palestinian autonomy, but also with moderate Arab countries such as Jordan, for example. What will be the effect of that on all of this? What will be also, I believe in that the influence of the Arab moderate countries is extremely important, and we have to yet to see what kind of solution do they offer. Some of them start to think already now of some kind of formula, what should be happening in Gaza the day after. So I can tell you that physically the two-state solution is still viable. We still can separate, and we should separate because, well, after this endless years of animosity and violence, the two people deserve, each one to have its own state. And the Palestinian state should definitely be open, for example, for Palestinian refugees, such as, for example, as the Jewish state is open for Jews from around the world, to build its statehood, to focus on its economy. But you can understand that it will never be accomplished in a just military way. It has to be accomplished through negotiations, through moderation, through understanding that there is no solution but the peaceful solution. After all, for security needs of both Israelis and the Palestinians. And again, this is something that I do not anticipate in the upcoming year or even two. This should be a process of regaining the trust and on it to build everything else.
That's all the questions that I had. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you.